everybody, my name is Kari Banta, and I'm the Program Manager for the Section 5310 program and RTOP here at the Texas Department of Transportation, and presenting grant writing basics. So just a general overview of grant writing, not specific to any program, not TxDOT or anything. So what we'll be going over is basic grant application preparation. Everything from identifying your project need to finding the grants to apply to, writing the grant, some tips, some examples, and then some further resources that you can look into to write grants. So you can come up with a project at any point, even before you see a grant opportunity. Make notes when you have an idea or when you discover a need. You can flesh those out later when you see a grant opportunity that matches that need. Then you've already got something to start with, and you're not trying to develop it when you first see the opportunity. So you're always going to need to determine a project need and scope. So you're going to think, who is the project serving? What are the community's needs? Is this part of an existing transit network and structure? Is it the first of its kind in an area, for example? Look at the grant, the specific grant you're applying to, and determine if it's intended to fund a project or if it can be used to supplement your organization's other expenses. This will help you determine how to break out the budget and how to address the parts of the narrative. Even if your project is for a specific area, think of the bigger picture and how your project fits into county or regional plans. So read the plans and be prepared to cite where your project addresses a need or a goal. This functions as support for your grant, a demonstration that there is a need, even if that isn't a requirement. And coordination with other entities is great. Even if it isn't a requirement, it's another way to demonstrate that your organization has support and there is a need for the project. And of course, you'll need to be identifying what they'll be doing in the project. So, getting grants, first you have to know where to apply. So seeking opportunities, lots of places to look. There are newsletters, email listservs, word of mouth, workshops, conferences. There are population-specific agencies that may have grants. You can look for funding sources that typically fund similar projects. So look based on your specific project or program need, and consider local funders first. They may be more open to supporting a community project, and they have an interest in benefiting the local community. Consider what other funding sources are available for this project request, and prioritize the funding needs in your organization. Consider the funding amount or range made available with the grant opportunity and how many awards they're planning to make. So how much is available, how much is the typical award, getting a sense of where your project would fall in the likelihood to be funded. And consider the terms of the grant. Is it something that's available every year? Would it be a recurring source of funding? Is it reliable? And really importantly, do you have the staff available to meet grant requirements for reporting and compliance? This is something that's key, especially for government grants. Those of you who have received TxDOT grants, you know there's a substantial reporting and compliance component to receiving these. And you want to be sure that your organization has the capacity to do that before you enter into a grant agreement. So other organizations besides TxDOT that has grants, there are federal agencies, the Federal Highway Administration, the Environmental Protection Administration. There are other state and regional sources, and then private foundations. That list of private foundations, they have funded transportation projects in the past. I put together this presentation with information from Texas and from Arizona, and folks have successfully gotten funding from them before, so places to look into. So planning your grant proposal, you need to plan in advance. Writing a grant, most of the work actually happens before you sit down and write it. And all of the time and effort that goes into planning really pays off. You need substance in what you write. It could be fancy, but you need to have the information in there. So your final grant, what you submit, could have a simple construction. It could be very basic, short sentences, but if it has the information, it'll do better. So if you plan the proposal in advance, it'll help you create a thorough application and demonstrate a compelling argument for your project need. So all grants are different, but they seek the same kinds of information from applicants. They usually want to know the scope of the project, the support from the community, its long and short range impact, and the overall budget and project cost estimates. So looking at project cost, what is it? How much funding will be needed for the startup and the continuing operation of the project? Are there local matching funds available? What's the project schedule? And how will inflation impact the project financially, especially for longer-term grants, things that go over a year? You'll want to determine the community impacts. Is this increasing ridership, mobility, multimodal accessibility? Is there an economic development component, better access to jobs? Will this affect greenhouse gas emissions or congestion? And will there be coordination with other programs or other transit? And you're going to want to determine project support. Are there other local agencies who support this project? Does the project have stakeholder partnerships? Do you have support from local, state, and federal political representatives? And now we get into writing the grant. So these are some principles of grant writing to help you create a compelling grant application. Again, it's all about the organization. Set yourself up for success by getting the right information. First thing you'll need is the needs statement. It's your grant's first impression on a scoring team. If it's solid, it will help you persuade the scorers, and it will also guide you through your writing. You can refer back to your needs statement when you're trying to craft the rest of the proposal. Basically, if the scorers can't understand your need, they can't advance it for funding. So with a good outline and the required data, you're not facing a blank page. It's not just that open box with the blinking cursor waiting for you to fill something in. You've already got the information to start putting in there. Break down more complicated questions, or if they're in multiple parts, break them into their components and address them individually. If it looks like there's redundancy, reread the question. There's probably something different about it, and there's a reason for each of the questions that are in a grant application. And always select relevant details for your narrative. So gathering your information. Read through all the materials that come with the grant. Read through the guidelines, the application instructions, all of it. And determine what facts and figures you need. And if you have to ask somebody else for anything in advance, and give yourself and give them time for it. Let them know as far in advance as you can. We're all busy. We're all wearing multiple hats, and it's a courtesy to the person that you're asking the support from to be able to give them that advance notice. And attend any pre-application meetings or webinars to get more information on the criteria for the grant. When you're collecting statistics or information from your own organization, make sure it's in the format requested. If it's looking for annual ridership, provide your annual ridership. Don't give it daily or monthly. So, back to organizing your ideas. You can sense a theme here. When you're reading the grant guidelines and making notes, don't skim. And I can't stress this enough. A scoring team can tell when the application doesn't follow the instructions. And if an application isn't organized, it's hard to connect the project to the grant requirements and the goal. So as you're going through the grant guidelines, make a list of pointers from the grant instructions for reference as you write. This will help you organize your ideas and information and make sure everything is included. And figure out the broader concept of the project and refer back to that in your narrative. So that's, once again, looking at your project needs statement. So outlining your proposal. This is something that I think gets overlooked a lot, but it can really help you structure your responses. A good outline will make sure that you cover all of the required points in the grant, and it sets you up to handle each part individually. You can break down the task into smaller pieces that are easier to work with when you have the time available. Not everyone has the luxury to sit down and finish these all in one shot. In fact, that's probably not a good idea in any case, because you're going to want time to reflect and review the information you've got there. And when you have a checklist, you can check items off, and that way you can feel a sense of accomplishment. You're working toward the end of it. You can see you're going to get there. So all grants are different. Some of them want information over a multi-page narrative. Others want the responses in a short answer format, so keep that in mind as you're making your outline. And really importantly, if the application is an online form, prepare the answers in another document, like a Word document or something like that, and paste them into the application and save frequently. That way you avoid losing your work if something happens with your computer or the application login times out. You won't lose anything that you've done. You can just paste it in again. That's really frustrating when that happens. So, talking about your narrative, getting the details and the data that work toward filling out your outline. You want to avoid explaining or defining general concepts. The focus is on your project and how it meets the grant objectives, not how that kind of project is good as a whole. So thinking about, for example, mobility management, there are lots of benefits to mobility management. That's not the focus of your application. You want to talk about the specifics on how it applies to your case. Focus on the key words identified in the call for projects. And remember, this is a section that should answer the who, what, when, where, and why about your project. So your project scope, the narrative scope. Here's an example, a really basic example looking at vehicles, and you can see how it addresses the specifics. So if you're thinking about a vehicle request, what fleet conditions or increased service make a vehicle necessary? Identify what type of vehicle and why. Why that particular kind of vehicle? Is it a replacement vehicle? Has it met its useful life requirements? Or is it expanding the fleet? And how is the need for additional fleet determined? Submit documentation if you have it. And how are you going to protect the asset? What's your preventative maintenance plan? So just an overview of some basic tips. Give yourself enough time. That's really huge. And I can't stress it enough because, and this is the last bullet on the page, you put yourself ahead when you have time to revise, edit, and clarify. Put it aside a couple of days, and then go back and reread it, and make sure that you've included everything that you thought you did. Make sure it makes sense. Are there gaps? And it's huge. If you can get a second reader who maybe isn't as familiar with the project as you are, and they can go through and kind of mimic what a scoring team, the amount of information they would have going in, that's a great help in terms of understanding how the project looks, because you've got it in your head, but somebody else may not understand it on that level. So submitting always a feeling of accomplishment. You can put that as one of your last checks on your checklist. Look at the process details. Is it online or is it in print? How many copies do you need? Is there a delivery address? And what's your deadline time? Take into account mail delivery or possible technical issues if you're applying online. And things can go wrong. Don't register for the online system on the day that the application is due. That's a nightmare scenario, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So part of your follow-up, don't miss your deadlines. Put the dates on the calendar. There are all kinds of important dates. You've got your due dates for the grant. If you have internal dates that you've given folks to supply information, you can put those on there. Any webinars or other application tutorials, get those on your calendar. Is there a pre-approval process? Take notes. And stay in contact. Check the grant announcement page for updates. You might also find, helpful tutorials like this one, or any kind of other information that comes out after the initial project call. And definitely follow up. If unfortunately you didn't get funded, ask for feedback, because you can take that and improve your next application. Here's a list of tips. There are a lot here. You can review them outside the context of the webinar. I just want to highlight a couple that I think are particularly noteworthy. When you're requesting letters of support, give them as much time as you can. You don't want to cut yourself short at the end, but you do want to respect the time and effort that it takes for others to supply that information. Also, when you're writing your grant, when you're defining your scope, keep it manageable and provide doable solutions for the need and for your capacity as an organization. And a big thing when you're writing, avoid getting bogged down. If you're having trouble with a particular section, move on to another section. If there's something easy that you think you've already laid out, go and deal with that. Come back to the more difficult part later, because our time is valuable, and there's nothing more frustrating than thinking that you're grinding away and just not making any progress. So here's an example of a project summary. This is also something to review outside the context of the webinar. It's drawn from elements of grants that have gotten funding, so this was a success. It has a clear scope. It identifies each element of the project and provides a reason for the inclusion of that element in the project. So those are kind of your main points. So a scoring or an evaluation team looking through this can understand right away off the bat, this is what's going on. So when they look at the rest of the application and the other information, they can put that into context. And here is getting into more information on a plan. I picked the example of addressing gaps or barriers, but pretty much any application is going to require you to respond to particular objectives. So this one, it's a real clear statement. It gives you the element of the project first. It identifies what issue it addresses and specifically how it addresses them. And this is, 4 kinds of common things that people apply for. There are additional resources for getting information, for finding grants and writing them. So the first one listed is for federal grants. There's also a foundation center. The Grantsmanship Center has some fantastic information. And you can always talk to your state and federal transit program managers. Myself and the other program managers here at TxDOT are more than happy to talk to you about your projects. We can't help you write the application, but we can help you with technical assistance, determining what is eligible, and giving you some other program information and criteria. So another fantastic resource, I plug this every time I give a webinar, but National RTAP has so much information available on all kinds of transit-related things. There are free trainings, there are other resources, there's stuff in here that can help you complete your project. And it's all free, which is the best price of anything. And if you can get this kind of stuff for free, then you can apply for other things. You can get other things funded with your grants. It's designed for rural transit, small urban, even large urban. You can all use the resources on the sites. But if you want to ask them a specific question, it has to be a rural transit provider to be able to contact them. And you can call them, you can send them an email, they can research things for you, they're great about getting back to you, and they're some really nice folks. So that was the basic grant writing overview. Again, my name is Kari Banta, and I'm with TxDOT. I'm the program manager for RTAP in Section 5310. And this webinar was originally developed with the review board from National RTAP, so another shout out to them. I hope this was helpful, and lots of luck.